Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss privacy and security engineering and related topics. I'm your host, Sean Falconer. Today, I'm joined by Jimmy Fong, Chief Commercial Officer at Seon, and we'll be talking about fighting online fraud. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sean. Great to be here. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Maybe we could start things off with an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I've had the fortune stroke odd circumstance ever since university to be in this particular field of tech. So early stage kind of fraud technology and online payments. And that was really, Sean, all the way back at the last financial crisis in 2008, like post-university. And by luck, via a mutual friend who worked at a startup, that became really successful and was eventually acquired by Visa. So that gave me like a front row seat at the kind of beginning and boom of like online commerce back at the last financial crisis when things really ramped up and people started to do more and more digital business online. Since then, I guess two other adventures. So similar sort of space, fraud and risk tech. One acquired by Ingenico Payment Services, so very large global point of sale terminal manufacturer, and then laterally with a startup out of Venice Beach on the West Coast, and then was acquired by American Express. So I land today at Seon. I joined the young co-founders about 3.5 years ago when we were back at seed stage. I was their first non-Hungarian teammate, situated out of rainy London, and helping the team grow to where we are today at just post Series B, about 220 teammates, global, and helping co-brands around the world fight online fraud.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I feel like you've found a niche around fraud, which is probably a good, career path to choose, because I don't think online fraud is going anywhere anytime soon. So you have some baked in sort of career safety with the choices that you made.
It was a mega strange dynamic. Obviously, 2008 was very scary for all of us that recall it, and especially if you're coming out of university around that sort of time with a proper financial meltdown around then, right? So I had lots of my uni pals and friends and kind of new teammates kind of in roles where there was definitely a sense of danger to kind of what their career journey was going to be like, but I guess the space I found myself in was really, really weird, because it was like the one booming sector where everything else was tanking. Online kind of commerce and online business was, it was like accelerated at that time. And so anyone in that kind of small segment back then of online payments, online kind of fraud, I guess got caught up in it, and yeah, it was a privilege to have like a lot of those lessons learned, especially with some of those iconic brands back then, to kind of what crafty fraudsters were doing. But you're right, it's one of those. If we zoom out like macro wise, anti-fraud or fraud detection and cybersecurity as a whole is one of those defensive areas, right, in stocks. So as the economy kind of takes a bit of a hit, a beating, cyclical stocks like security and cyber and fraud detection are in fact are in ever greater demands, as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. And so I'm really, I'm excited to get into the conversation today for a couple of reasons. When I first stepped into the role that I'm in now, one of the big things I had to deal with was a really challenging fraud issue. And that's actually how I learned about Seon. And I was so impressed with the product that I had reached out, because I had to have you guys on the show. And you're actually the first vendor where I'm a customer that I've had as a guest on the show. So I think that says something. I don't know, it says something about me or it says something about Seon, but I think I'd like to say that it says something about the quality of the product. And maybe just to set some context for those that are not super familiar with the space of online fraud, how does online fraud work, and why is it such a concern for online businesses and consumers today? As it's basically as much of a concern today as it has been for the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of two main areas that what we obsess over as a tech scale up ourselves, and those two areas are number one around who you're doing business with online. So if you're any type of online business and you've got a transactional component, you're trying to board a net new customer online, you have very little data points to work with. Those are classically like an email address that you ask of that new user, and or a phone number. What Seon does on kind of one end is we take that data point like an email or phone number, and we enrich it with what we call a digital footprint. So our hypothesis as a scale up is pretty simple. It's that we reckon most good people online, maybe myself, maybe like yourself, we associate that email or phone to other things online. So for instance, you may associate Sean Faulkner at gmail.com to things like your Insta account, your LinkedIn account, your Facebook account, your Twitter account, and about 60 other services is what we look at. And that's generally speaking what good people look like, and what good customers that look like nowadays. The converse is totally true too. If you're a fraudster, if you have someone, or you're someone that has a nefarious intent to go board a platform, pretty easy to create an email or phone number, and pretty easy to do that at reasonable scale. You can script these things, you can create a bunch of them quickly, and you can try and attack like an infra. But you generally don't recreate the digital footprint to go alongside it. And that's what Seon's technology kind of on the onboarding level kind of helps with. And what we've heard, Sean, from customers that use us, what they really like is it's totally invisible. So you're not affecting things from like a marketing or top of the funnel churn. So this is typically implemented before like identity checks or know your customer checks, and it's really done at form fill. So it's really invisible. That's the first bit of what we do. The second bit of what we do is once someone's actually interacting with your platform, say you're a neobank or a crypto platform or a trading platform, then there's different interaction points, whether you log in, whether you conduct something of risk, like you add a new payment method, you might withdraw some funds from that platform, and you can run Seon at each of those points. And what we do is we look at thousands of data points to do that interaction, and we apply our own ML, machine learning, to it, and we basically spit out, hey, this looks sketchy, you should stop it right there, or you should at least challenge it right there. So if you like, we're automating the business of what looks really weird and abnormal to help a business make sure they're A, boarding good quality people onto their platform, and B, that they remain good quality and they don't turn into sketchy actors.
Mm-hmm. Now, what you said about sort of the digital or social footprint, that makes a ton of sense. Like a real person is probably going to have a lot of history with a variety of different platforms, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, and the whole gambit of them. Is that something that is, if fraudsters kind of were keyed into, they would be able to fake, or is it just too much work and effort to actually do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, it's one of the design things when we were, a little bit of a side story to this, almost the design of kind of Seon as a startup and a scale up and our go to market. And we tried to very deliberately build the product differently from, say, the very saturated space we're in. And one of the design challenges we were actually trying to solve is there was actually a good amount of decent risk tech out there in the market. There really is. But one of the things that's hard is for someone with an actual problem to go and experience tech that helps solve that business problem. And if you like, a lot of how Seon's go to market, you can see it when you go on Seon.io, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, Sean, earlier in your show, is we've tried to make the product front facing completely so that people can experience that light bulb moment for themselves, if you like. So when you ask the question, hey, if fraudsters know that a digital footprint might be what Seon's looking at, that's fine. In fact, it's actually been part of our design to put everything quite open, which is very weird in our space of security, right? And in cyber, it's really the opposite. It's quite black box to how the actual technology works. We've gone the opposite. So if someone goes on Seon.io, you can look at our public-facing API references, so you can validate, hey, this is what Seon's looking at. And the takeaway from that is there's lots and lots and lots and lots of data points we're looking at. And what we've seen again and again, because we're not hiding it, we think the greater good of serving more online business very quickly with very effective tech far outweighs the chances of, say, particularly in the know fraudsters, of understanding particular technology kind of tactics to use. So what we've definitely found again and again, though, is, hey, you as a fraudster might know that you have to recreate a digital footprint. That's fine. But really what our tech does is it's able to, we're seeing people don't recreate digital footprints at scale. And it's partly two things. It's the economics of it. They don't need to. Is the other side of things as well. They can attack literally thousands of other businesses which don't screen for things like digital footprints as well. So you've got kind of those two motivators, right? One is the economics of it don't really add up to create these footprints, and then two, just they don't even need the option. They can be lazy as a fraudster and target thousands of companies out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not, for the most part, I imagine these types of attacks, similar to like, smashing into a car and stealing whatever's in it. It's not necessarily a targeted attack. You're basically going with whatever has the least resistance, and then I'm going to take advantage of those. And if something has some level of resistance, well, it's not really worth it because there's, like you said, thousands of other easy targets that I could just go after.
Yeah, and it's a real learning from us diving into the world of kind of the mindset of a fraudster and some of the psychology. I remember on like a show before where we were talking about how fraudsters, professional fraudsters, criminal organizations target. And, there might have been the expected, we're after, neobanks or challenger banks, or we're following where the money is. But the answer was actually a lot more indiscriminate. It was, hey, we spray and pray, and it works. It works really well, and it still works in 2023 really well. So it's not like us, maybe like you guys as a B2B SaaS organization with a very deliberate marketing strategy and segmentation. Nothing like that, right? There's lots of high value targets that they can go after.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like spam. Spam is still out there, still exists. Somebody's making money off of it. It's still out there, still existing, essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
So you also mentioned that Seon takes into account like patterns of behavior, and there's some machine learning going on behind the scenes. So I imagine the sort of pattern of behavior when someone's fraudulently interacting with any software is going to be a little bit different than what a normal person might be doing. They might be, copying, pasting more. They might, bounce off pages faster, or, click through things faster. Is that the types of signals that are taken into account in this machine learning sort of pattern recognition approach?
Yeah, behavior is important for sure. I would actually look at it slightly different. I'd zoom out even like a couple levels ahead of that. So I think what we've seen be successful for many of our customers, and they really range from like all types of industry, whether they are a neobank like Revolut, or they are an airline like KLM, the Royal Dutch Airline, or a social platform like Patreon. The kind of most effective use of our tech, kind of think of it as almost like a net approach. So the idea being is that a fraudster may be able to understand, okay, they are looking at how my mouse cursor moves, so thus I can't run a script which looks a bit inhuman by flicking from one button to another in such an efficient and smooth, way that probably is going to say it's a script. That's one kind of like little light bulb moment, but really what Seon and kind of our recommended approach to kind of online fraud detection is around looking at a very holistic or net approach. So it's trying to catch everything from what we call the customer lifecycle. So literally when someone registers, so when they land on a site for the first time, how do they start looking? indeed to how their digital footprint may look, to whether they log in and where are they logging from? What's the IP address? Are they using any kind of proxies? Are they using any kind of VPNs? Are they accessing via a Tor node, for instance? Through to what are they doing? What are they doing? And one little bit of that subset is the behavioral. And some of the examples you gave are really good examples there. But maybe it's also the type of product or service they're interacting with. Some are definitely going to be more risky than others from, say, the merchant's point of view. So you want to take a more granular approach to kind of how they're interacting, what they're interacting with, through to things like what are the exit points. So if you're a crypto platform, you can withdraw. If you're a gambling platform, you can certainly withdraw to certain payment methods. So the kind of idea is only by fully looking at a complete life cycle of that interaction, all the way from beginning right through to the potential of offboarding, do we see that the most effective kind of fraud fighting begins. And that's what we mean by a net approach. So it's using a number of different, if you like, technologies, whether it's device intelligence, be able to spot, hey, that iPhone you're using, Sean, for the last 6 months has suddenly changed to an Android device with a weird font pack. That's unusual. And the idea being is, like fraudsters, they're becoming ever more cunning and sophisticated and technically apt as well. They might be able to mask or hide certain bits here and there, but the idea, where we've seen kind of our customers with the most effective kind of strategies is they're applying a more holistic kind of net approach, being they're able to kind of trip kind of a professional fraudster up in one of those ways there.
I see. And then I imagine, even things like, running a really old version of Android or something like that would be, a clear signal that it's probably not a normal behavior, especially if it's like B2B SaaS company that is targeting, North America or westernized nations, where most of those business people are probably going to have a fairly up-to-date smartphone.
Yeah, it's spot on. And that's we can go quite nerdy into kind of the low level stuff of like what we look at there, but yeah, that definitely looking at things like the instances. But guess what? That low level kind of replicated device is perfect for someone running a script, right, and attacking stuff like at velocity. Indeed, that would be an example of an inconsistency that we're able to spot for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then what are the types of vulnerabilities in online systems that these fraudsters are typically trying to take advantage of, and what is the ultimate goal for the fraud?
Yeah, so different. I would say different topologies per vertical, of course, and we despite the comment made about how indiscriminate some online fraudsters are, there are definitely subject matter experts in say. Attacking kind of online banks, or attacking, say, the travel industry, stroke attacking, say, video game industry as well, and reselling and and repurposing kind of virtual currency. So there are definitely specialities for all the different sectors. I think it's really two things, though. It's really two things. One is typically, how can we get into a platform? Is kind of the first thing from a fraudster's point of view, and there's lots and many ways on how to do that. That's one. So how do you get access? And then two, once you've got access, how do you take anything of value out of it, and it has some form of secondary market? What we're seeing a lot nowadays is, fraudsters are, they're humans just like me and you, and so they're smart and they're keeping up to date, and they understand as people start deploying machine learning models like what we have at Seon, that they need to start behaving in semi-legitimate ways. So we're seeing a lot of fraudster organizations legitimately access accounts where things do look pretty decent, and they sit fairly dormant on them, and they perform, not completely dormant, they perform some smaller level of transactions. And what they're waiting for is that they've got enough accounts that they can essentially perform a more coordinated attack at the same time to withdraw a decent amount at the same time. So we're seeing lots of kind of zombie account setups, which again aren't totally zombied with zero activity. They have minimal activity on them, and again, from a fraud fighting point of view, that's a pretty hard thing to pick up, right? Your merchants are asking, hey, how do we really tell the difference between kind of these almost these latent accounts about to be used for attack? So yeah, the price per vertical is pretty juicy depending on most of these, but yeah, I guess it's just a funny thing working in anti-fraud. You see human creativity at its best and working hardest there.
Hey, it's Sean, host of the show you're listening to. First and foremost, I hope you're enjoying the interview. And if you are, please support the show by subscribing and leaving a positive rating and review. And if you want to keep the conversation going, join our community at skyflow.com/community. Okay, that's it for me. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of challenges there, but what are some of the the really big kind of challenges and complexities involved in the space with trying to distinguish between like a legitimate user and the legitimate user behavior and what is ultimately a fraudulent activity?
Yeah. In the kind of online e-tail case, we have it actually even more complicated than that, Sean. We have cases where is their behavior, it's technically allowable, right? So we think of our online retail friends and the surge of online returns, for instance, or friendly, in quotations, friendly fraud there as well. So in online gambling, I'll illustrate the point even further with you've got online poker groups where people are chip dumping to each other. Is that actually fraud, or is it? There's definitely a blurred line between them. I think our advice on both those cases, despite being completely different industries and verticals, is it's certainly to acknowledge it is blooming hard to tell the thin line between what's intentional, what's unintentional. And I think the way that we do see it best being solved is when the biggest problem is, are you able to see in one place like where all this stuff is happening? So you're able to at least build some logic of pattern recognition that's going on here. And in both those cases, in e-tail, we were able to kind of solve kind of a retail case where, of course, they were seeing, especially at the tail end of like COVID, there was probably quite inexplainable, all online, interactions blew up again, during the pandemic period. And so in lockstep, the percentile of returns also kind of jumped up as well. But what we were seeing were, if you're able to track the data, you're able to see certain repeat offenders that had massive outlier return rates compared. And so that definitely tips into the, hey, this is our average and our median percentiles. But at this level, this person's an outlier no matter how you look at it. So you're able to kind of at least approach those kind of offenders and at least address it appropriately. Same with kind of betting patterns, or in the example I gave, online poker kind of betting patterns and who was winning and losing in a peer-to-peer setting like poker, for instance. At least you're able to categorize the data, you're able to form an understanding based on the data, what the median, what the average is, and what the highs and lows are, and you're able to take a view on kind of, hey, these are the outliers here that we need to address. But gosh, Sean, I can definitely reiterate the kind of blur between what is fraud, what is friendly, and what is intentional, unintentional is becoming super thin there.
Yeah, I imagine. And it sounds like one of the powers, at least in the case of the Seon platform, is that it can be actually customized to the specific product or domain, so it can learn those different patterns of behavior for a specific product versus just essentially approaching this problem as a general problem across all domains.
And it was actually one of the design challenges we were trying to solve from the beginning. So as I mentioned, fraud detection has existed ever since I had the fortune of kind of entering the space since university, when e-com kind of took off. Back in kind of 2008. So it's existed for a decent amount of time now, and there's very good solutions out there. But generally speaking, those kind of solutions had tripled down on certain verticals. So, for instance, you had really good risk platforms built specifically for the airline industry, and the same for, say, online e-tailers, and the same for, say, video gamers. So you had separate platforms. You had very customized kind of solutions in there that catered towards those particular verticals. And if you like, Seon represented, when we were kind of stood up back just under 6 years ago, we were stood up as a framework platform that was actually designed deliberately to be used industry agnostically. And the view there was, again, back to we were trying to build a platform that was flexy enough to take in inputs from pretty much any data source, and to have an output that would be universally useful. And again, those two things, right? One is, how do you add more net new people to your platform, and you're able to assess good or bad in an invisible way, causes no churn or friction. And then two, when they're inside the platform, how do you look at inputs and produce an output that can give strong confidence of whether to reject or accept that interaction, and to be used not just at checkout, which is where the classic risk providers were used, like just before a payment transaction checkout, which is way too late in the day. So our view was you've got to be used at every interaction point where there's potential, in quotations, risk. And so, if you like, Seon represented like a new way of addressing those two universal challenges. And as you said, they're done in a totally agnostic way across, whether you're in the travel industry, whether you're a gambling platform, or whether you're a bank online. And that's, our customer base kind of reflects that as well. It's used across all those.
So how did all this start? How did Seon sort of get a start with sort of looking at this problem in a different way?
Yeah. So the origin story of Seon, I think harks to kind of like, I guess, kind of the classic when you're scratching your own itch. So the two young co-founders, Tamas and Benza, they were in their last year graduating out of a really good university out of Budapest, Hungary in Europe. And the actual plan wasn't fraud detection. It was actually to launch, back then, it was one of the first crypto exchanges in Central Europe, was actually the objective. And they launched, which was really cool. They launched, and then to them, in the first days of being open, they were one of the first to offer in the region fiat exchange for crypto. And as you can imagine, that's pretty attractive to anyone wanting to exchange stolen credit card information for untraceable money. And they were sought after and smashed by fraudsters, within the first couple of days of being open. And for those guys, like Tamas and Benza, they immediately had to turn around and start looking for help. And that's what they found. They found amazing technology out there. But what they couldn't get was something that they could actually understand how the product worked. So like transparency into what the product actually did. Two, they couldn't get anything up and running in less than, at best case scenario, a few weeks, if not months, of going live. And by that time, their platform would have completely burnt down. So for those guys, they had to hack together essentially the crude beginnings of some of our tech stack to be able to identify at the registration stage stuff that was already looking sketchy. And through quite a few iterations, obviously, of hacking together tools that would be able to discern good from bad on their own kind of use case, they started getting really good feedback from within the rest of the crypto platform kind of space. And forward a few more months, and they recognized and pivoted actually to providing anti-fraud tools instead of the crypto platform itself. So like they were very much scratching their own itch at the beginning, and not because there wasn't tech out there, but the issue was there wasn't tech that was fast enough to get up and running, and then two, kind of understandable and transparent, whether that was pricing or contracts as well.
Yeah, it's kind of the classic like startup pivot. You start on one thing, you have a problem internally that you need to solve, so you can't find a solution to it that quite fits your needs, so you build it, and then you realize, oh, this is actually a better business than maybe where we started out with.
Fully and 100%. I think that's what we've kept in our DNA. That's really core. So we're almost 6 years old now, and yeah, we're at that kind of Series B stage of venture funding, and we were led by IVP in March last year, so just a wee bit over a year. So we're just in that deploying capital. But one of the things we're very strong on is making sure that when people have that challenge of, hey, how do we identify good from bad on our site, to how do we tell if stuff is sketchy on our platform, that people can get up and running in hours, and days, not weeks and months. So there's a real kind of strong focus on proving out that the tech works very quickly, because that was the exact same as Tamash and Benza's pain as well.
Yeah, and I think when, as somebody who was, suffering from the pain of some fraud issues, as the person on the receiving end of that, you're also looking for a solution that you can implement quickly because you just want to solve the problem, essentially.
Like who wants to go through like 3 rounds of discovery meetings where you see a slide deck and you can't solve your problem yet, right? let alone a multi-year contract to tie you in about experiencing value very quickly. So yeah, that might have worked. Kind of in the kind of maybe beginning of the pandemic, but nowadays in this macro, all of us, and I'm sure you guys too, the CFO is looking over at every line item being spent and needing extremely fast justification for why do they invest or spend those marketing bucks, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then for individuals out there, or even for businesses that maybe that aren't ready to implement Seon, or they wanted to kind of try things themselves, what are sort of the best practices that they might be able to follow, or that you recommend for improving security posture or minimizing the risk of falling victims of sort of online fraud issue?
Yeah, so probably a couple of things there. One is education's massive to all of us, and in fact, us as a scale up, we believe in it massively as well, both on the consumer side, both on the business side, and both on the ecosystem side as well. So if you like, lots and lots of very, very good resources out there, first of all, especially a lot of the open source material and Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF, kind of material as well. From Seon's side, you'll see we have quite a top-heavy marketing team, and that's because we believe in the power of giving out knowledge to this. So, one of the things that we've strongly believed in is like giving away as many answers as you can and guides. So again, back to the whole, keep like sharing information and answers as generously as possible to it. So you'll see a lot of like the Seon resources, and our resources have a lot of like media in there, podcasts, a lot of like guest slots with. We've had the FBI on our show, for instance, sharing some of their kind of top tips. Through to and then the last thing on Seon's side is we're one of the kind of few kind of like anti-fraud companies that has created a free forever like version of their product. So this is perfect if you're trying to prove out an internal POV, or if you're like a kind of a nascent kind of online startup and needing to kind of think about this at the early days. You can literally try for free and remain a free for life kind of customer. It's kind of a heart of what we believe in as well, is sharing that knowledge and the tech to help.
Yeah, so it sounds like I think education is a big part in collaboration, information sharing between businesses, industry associations, maybe law enforcement agencies. You mentioned the FBI as well. Are there sort of notable initiatives about this kind of information sharing to help educate the market on the challenges they might face as an individual or even as a business?
Yeah, it's one of these. If you think like the way we look at it is, like wanting to share information and breaking down silos between organizations on the good guy side, say our side, it is an age-old thing that's explained now in practice. It's just a lot more friction and a lot more, say, especially if you're in the private industry, competitive kind of challenges there and incentives from stopping that happening. But that doesn't exist, right? It's asymmetric, right? On the bad guy side, that's what you see completely differently. So when you go and join and you sit in these Telegram groups, which aren't even like covertly hidden, right? You can enter them pretty easily as a good guy as well. And we have much of our R&D that sits in some of these grey domains, watching kind of how fraudsters think about the next vectors to attack. There is no problem sharing information there on the bad guy side. They're amazing at kind of, hey, there's a new bank release and exploit on this particular brand. You guys should check it out. There's a unbelievable amount of knowledge sharing on the bad guy side. So it's an internally tough one from the good guy side, and it's based off things like market dynamics, and that's really tough. But you do have, we're big proponents of open source community. We're big proponents of things like the OSINT kind of practices, where it's looking at specifically what you can gather publicly, because a lot of Seon stack is not built off being able to look at, say, level 2 or level 3 kind of private information. That kind of stuff will get you in trouble with the data authorities. We're out of the EU, so it really helps that we're GDPR compliant by design, as well as the necessary ISO certifications for security. But so everything we look at as a technology scale up and business is the open information that, and the best analogy we like to make is actually good, effective human fraud fighting teams are probably doing some form of what Seon does, albeit highly manually. So we'd be the equivalent of like Control C and Control Ving, like say, shot Sean's name into some of those platforms just to see what the heck turns up. But all we can ever get back is what you allow to be publicly returnable as well. So I would definitely give a shout out to kind of the a ton of the open source initiatives, as well as kind of OSINT methods from an education point of view. But bear in mind that's underpinned by the asymmetry that we face for information flow versus, say, the kind of fraudster or kind of bad guy community there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like they're doing a good job with the information sharing. So, in your opinion, what does the future of fraud prevention and maybe even fraud look like? And, what role might things like generative AI play for both sides? Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of innovation going on in that space right now. And I imagine both in fraud prevention and those who are interested in exploiting systems from a fraud standpoint are both looking at these technologies as a way to help amplify their work.
Yeah, and in fraud detection, it was one of the first pragmatic and practical applications of AI, right? With the advent of neural networks, it really was a perfect use case, how to spot patterns and auto-suggest correlation and suggested actions based off data. So the advantage of fraud detection is it's had that capability in there from day one, because it was really how any kind of online fraud detection can be scaled. And then to today's world around GAI, I think it's something that Seon believed in the beginning. I think like fraud detection about 15 years ago, the type of artificial intelligence deployed, the strain of it was it was known as black box AI, and it was by far the most widely deployed kind of strain of AI, and it definitely has its advantages. The downsides of black box AI is there's little to no explainability. Sadly, you don't understand why that risk score got its score, and thus you can imagine you're a frustrated end consumer on some sort of customer line, not understanding why their online application for whatever product or service just got declined. And then the poor call center agent not really knowing either, right, when they look up the system. So that's the challenge with that black box AI model, like lack of explainability. And initiatives like out of the EU, we're definitely heavy-handed when it comes to regulation at times. But in this certain example where there's a real push for explainability and it's built into some of our banking kind of technology and legislation moving forward, it is actually a forward step. And I think the rest of the world kind of will follow that. So Seon was one of those early adopters where our strain of AI was, if you like, the opposite of it, a white box model. So I think that kind of helps with the explainability, because that's the design of it. You can fully understand why a score reached a score, and so any needed parties can understand that as well. But when you ask the question, hey, what does kind of GAI like lead to in the future? I think it's an evolution of kind of what we believed in from the beginning. Like, good AI application is not designed to replace humans. It's designed at best to supplement and be a really helpful sidekick that can do stuff that human brains aren't designed to do, i.e. sift through tons of data that a human mind can't hold, an instance, unless you're a savant. But that's the point of like really good GAI, is to act as like a hyper smart buddy to fraud fighting teams. And that's what we believe in wholeheartedly, is the kind of way we've tried to build Seon is designed to help those hardworking fraud fighting teams just become even more effective and even more efficient at what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think what you mentioned there about how things like online fraud detection was one of the first sort of practical applications of AI, which makes a ton of sense because there's just a lot of data to process, a lot of pattern recognition to be involved there to understand and essentially differentiate between what a legitimate user is and what a fraudulent user is. And as we start to wrap up here, is there anything else, Jimmy, that you'd like to share?
And I actually just remembered like a last comment there, Sean, with I think it's important to comment also from what we've observed on the other end, the fraudsters end as well. So as we as a society benefit from kind of advents in literally GAI becoming better and better and more useful. I would say so do fraudsters. so we are absolutely seeing this this kind of arms race on the other side, where it used to be the case 15 years ago you had to be at least a little bit technical on from an adversary point of view to use the technology. But gosh, in the last kind of 5-6 years we've really seen the growth of the crime as a service, essentially, so the equivalent of like SaaS but for criminals, right? And now it's people with will, people with resources, and people with network capability that are taking advantage of services just like all of us use legitimately in the business world, in SaaS stack world, or marketing or MarTech SaaS stack world. They are pressing buttons and able to subscribe to monthly hosted cloud services to perform very specific niche services. So that's just an observation and something that a lot of our fraud fighting teams are spending time monitoring as well. And it's kind of one of those sucky sides of, as technology advances, just recalling that it also does the same. In fact, it's often propagated by the other side because there's a even higher financial incentive on that side to push the boat out and evade. There's no GDPR and ISO certifications needed on that side of the fence.
Yeah, they're not facing the same restrictions that a legitimate business is facing, and they're able to take advantage of whatever tools and technologies are going to allow them to essentially exploit people faster and better and at scale.
Yeah, and invisibly, right? So, back to the core problem. How the heck do you tell the difference between someone that's human, that might be just doing something suboptimally, to someone that's got nefarious intent? And that's really, what I guess kind of scale-ups like ourselves are obsessed over as well. It's a universal question, and it's what we kind of live and breathe for.
Well, Jimmy, I want to thank you so much for being here. I found that really fascinating. There's so much to kind of dive into the space. And I think it's something like you had mentioned that it's important for all, I think, businesses and individuals to take a little bit of time to educate themselves about what people are doing in the fraud space so that they don't become, a victim.
Yeah, and if I can give a shout out on that, and the best ones we found is when we did a couple of podcast seasons where by far the most popular and compelling were when we through a number of series managed to get hold of a fraudster, active fraudsters, and they were sharing in little bite-sized nuggets what their psychology was, what their tactics were, what their tools were, and some of even like their motivations for it as well. So I'll give a shout out to anyone to have a check out of those podcasts if you're wanting kind of an insight into the other side as well.
Yeah, awesome. I'll get those links from you and I'll include those in the show notes. But thanks again and cheers. Thanks for being here.
All right. Great to be on. Thanks, Sean. Cheers now.